Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're in Masechta Sukkah Daf Lamed Zayin. We are going to begin on Lamed Vav Amid Beis by the Mishnah. In Oidin es Halulav El Bamino Diva Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that even though he does require Eged, that you need to tie up the three minim, namely the Lulav, Hadas, and Rava, together. It needs to be only from their species and not from something else. Rameir Oimer Afil B'chut It could even be with some type of cord or thread, as Rashi says, lichil belaz. Amar Meir, Maaseh ba'anshi Yerushalayim, shahayu oigden es lulaveim bigmani shel zahav, that they actually used these strings which were made out of gold, and apparently that was acceptable. So Amar lo b'minu hayu oigden oisim lamata. Actually, it was tied with the proper min on the bottom, and therefore the actual eged was that which was on the inside, and the outside was just, as Rashi says, noi ba'alma, was just for beautification purposes. Amrav, I feel b'tziv, I feel b'ikra dedikla. Says you can use all different types of the tree, whether it's the bast or the roots from the date palm tree. Yomarabba, my time Rabbi Huda. So why does Rabbi Huda have this strict opinion that it has to be one of the minim? Because Ksavar lo sarach eged, as we said previously, according to Rabbi Huda, he requires eged because he learns that from Agudas Ezai. Therefore, if you take from another species, all of a sudden you're not taking the arba minim anymore. Is an issue about Taisa. Remember, Rabbi Mina Minula that Siva Ikra the Dikla Mina Didulavahu. It must be that these are acceptable, and they're considered to be species that come from the lulav, and therefore it's not considered to be a separate min or min achrina. The sign of the pasuk says, "V'sukkos teishu." A person is supposed to dwell in sukkahs. So sukkah shel kol davar. Div Rameir. Rameir holds that the schach can be made out of anything. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Huda Omer ein sukkah noheges el bedal minim shebalulav. According to him, says the only things that you could use for the schach, which of course is not like what we learned before. All we just say, as long as it's gedulim and aretz, and something which is not makabel toma, is something that can be used for schach. But according to the Shita Rabbi Huda, it has to be from the arba minim. Vadin noising ma'ulav shein noig b'leilos kibiyamim. When it comes to the lulav, it's not noig at night, just like it is during the day. Enu noig el arba minim, and we say that obviously for the lulav you can only use the four minim. So sukkah shel heges b'leilos kibiyamim. So when it comes to sukkah, which is more lenient, that you can do it during the day and night, so you would think that it should also be the arba minim. Again, the question is, why is that a kal v'chomer, right? So after all, fine. It's exeres hakasav that these are the things that you're supposed to use by the dinim of lulav and esrog. That's what it says. However, it doesn't say that is required. It says soilus. It has to be the leftovers from your silos and your wine presses. So Amrlo Kodin Shiatadun Chilas Lahachma V'Seifel Hakelenu Din. So he says it a little bit differently. That it cannot use this as a kavachimer, because even though you're going strict by requiring the schach has to be arba minim, but you're going to end up being makel in a way that people are not going to end up doing the mitzvah as we continue the Lamed Zayin Madal. Well, matzah arbas minim yoshev uvatel. A person is going to be sitting and not being able to fulfill the mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah. But Torah Amar b'sukkahs teishu shivashamim sukkah shel kol davar. It doesn't say what you're supposed to use, specific materials. You can use anything. Therefore, it goes against the line of the Kavachimer. V'chein be'ezer oimer se'u hahar, go up to the mountain, go out of the mountain. V'haviu elai zeis, v'eli eitz shemen, v'eli hadas, v'eli tamar, v'eli eitz avos. And he says that these things should be brought. Now, v'yasa sukkos kikosov, and you should make sukkahs like it is written. Now, Rabbi Huda savar hani l'defanois ali hadas, v'ali tamar, v'ali eitz avos l'schach. According to Rabbi Huda, says no. He says that those other things that are not of the arba minim, that's for the walls, because you can make anything for the walls. However, the hadas, the tamarim, which is the lulav, and the eitz avos, which is the hadas, um, again, is schach. So therefore, he says, no, the pasuk is actually telling you that you need to use the arba minim. But Tanan, the sach menasarim de Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda does say you're allowed to use boards. The alma siv ikra dedikla min the lulabahu shma mina. So this is a proof that it's actually a min from the lulav, because the only one of the dal minim that could be used as boards is the trunk of the palm tree. There's no other way of logically saying that a myrtle or a willow or the branches from a sukkah, from an esrog rather, is going to be nisarim. It's only going to be the trunk of the palm tree, and therefore this is a raya. Again, the question is, why didn't it just say this one sentence, the sachem nisarim de Rabbi Yehuda? Again, we want to show that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that you have to use the arba minim for schach, and therefore this is an acceptable one, which obviously means that you can also tie it up as one of the arba minim for the lulav. Alma siv ikra dedikla min the lulav hushma mina. Miyam Rabbi Yehuda arbas minim in midachrina lo. Does he really say dafka the arba minim v'asanya? Sicha min asarim shel erez. A person uses cedar wood. Sheish v'hen dal tvach never kol psula. So that's already considered to be too wide. We say xeris tikra. So that's possible. Ein behen dal tvachim. Let's say it's not 4 tvachim wide. Rameir Pais Rabbi Yehuda machsher. Rabbi Yehuda says it's acceptable. So it's a question. We see clearly you can use erez. As we mentioned previously in the end of the first parak, that if, let's say, you remove the space of the size of each of those boards and you put in schach in its place, then certainly it's kosher. But nonetheless, we see that an erez, cedar wood, which is not one of the arba minim, is acceptable. So Mara says, no, my erez hadas. What he's actually referring to over here, it says erez, it's referring to using hadassim for the schach. Kidarabba bar Rav Huna. Diamar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amri Be Rav, Asar Mini Razimhain. There's 10 different types of species of cedar. Shenamar Etin Bamidbar Eris Shita, and here's the key word, Vahadas. So it could be the cedar, the shita, which is the acacia wood, or the hadas. So in fact, this is not a proof against Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda again still says that the schach has to be from the arba minim. He says you can even use other types of materials, and he brought a raya, and the Mishnah said regarding these golden strings. Tanya Umra Meir Masa B'Kiler Yerushalayim, regarding these nobles of Yerushalayim, Shahay Oigden Es Lavehim Bigmania Shel Zahav. Again, they use these strings of gold. Again, they tied it on the bottom. Sarmalhu Rabba Lahanhu Migadli Hoshana Debe Rishkusa. He spoke to those people who grew the Hoshanas for the Rishkusa. Ki Gadliso Hoshana. When you tie up the Hoshana Debe Rishkusa Shirle Beis Yad, you should leave a little bit of a handle, as Rashi says, mitachas l'eged, from underneath the tie, shel yikachenu b'makom egdoi, so you shouldn't take it the place where it's tied. V'ksaver ein eged min ha-mitzvah k'rabbanan d'yarma ein tzarech eged. He holds that ein tzarech eged, and therefore you're not really supposed to hold it on that place. You holding where the eged is a chatzitza. So there he says you should make a space so that you could hold it not there, because according to the Rabbanan, in Sarach Eged, and therefore it's a chatzitza. Rabbi Omer Kol Noisa Enu Chaitzitz says no, anything which is used to beautify the mitzvah is not a chatzitza. So therefore, as Rashi says, Bein Yad L'Hoishana Ve'in Zulakicha. So even though he says it's, you think that's a chatzitza, no, because it's something which is beautification. Even if you hold that a lulav ein tzarech eged, nonetheless, it's not something in which will be a chatzitza. Yomi Rabba lo linked inish hoshana besudra. A person should not take the hoshana with a scarf. To be ina lakicha tama v'leika. You need to have a lakicha tama, complete taking. And if you're holding it with a kerchief of sorts, so that's again considered to be a chatzitza. If you take it with something else, that's still considered to be a lakicha. and that's not a chisaron of a lakicha tama. How do we know? How do we see this din that if you would take something through something else, like through in this case a sudar, that it still works? That none. And we see again we talk about the dinim of by the para and the azov. Azov katzar misafka b'chut v'kush v'toivel umal v'oiches be'azov umaze. So it says, what happens if you have this azov in which it's katzar, it's a little bit too short, so a person can take a thread or a reed and you could dip it and then bring it up. And you can hold on to the azov and sprinkle it. So what is this saying? So Rashi says, you would bring the mechatas from one side to the next, with this tube of reeds, and the aruchos, they were long, and it was secluded to be matar those who are impure. They used to dip the azov and sprinkle it. If let's say the azov was too short, it's not able to reach to the bottom, so you can kind of like almost go fishing. You can tie a little knot around, a little string, dip it in, and then that's good enough. So you're supposed to take it and then immerse it. Over here, not really being kaval in the proper way, because it's alidi devaracher. So we see that this is actually acceptable. So mamai, how do you know this is the proof? Maybe since it's joined and tied together, it's considered like it's the thing itself. So therefore, maybe that's not considered alidi davar acher. Maybe that's considered to be like the thing itself because it's tied. Rather, we're going to learn out from here. Nafal mishvei feres l'shaykes puzzle. If let's say accidentally it fell from the shvei feres, from this tube, to the shaykes, says Rashi, offer hayim avim mishvei feres. They would also put the ashes in the tube, and to sanctify the water, b'shaykes shel even, with this vessel of stone. Shekol masapar b'kli avanim haisa. It was always done with avanim. V'haya, which is brought down at the very beginning of the Yomi, why we're so strict by para. And they would put the offer from the shveiferes from the tube into the water. Shibishaykis shall offer noisin mawa. As the pasuk says, "Maim chayim el keli shemaim noisin tchila el kli." The water has to first be in the vessel. Okay, so it says that nafal mishvei feres. Let's say it accidentally fell into the water. The din is it is puzzle. So let's continue on Lamed Zayin Mebez to understand this a little bit better. The Gemara says ha hapilu hu kosher. That's only because it fell by itself. But let's say that you threw it in. In other words, says Rashi, you didn't actually put it in, but you threw it in. It's like it fell by itself. You didn't actually hold on to the offer itself. You're holding on to the tube, and you end up shaking it inside. That's good. You're supposed to actually place it. So this is going to be the raya that is considered to be acceptable. Let's look at question 7, which will hopefully explain this a little bit better. So we said the fact that it says by kiddush mechatos, if you want to be mekadosh, sanctify the water of the chatos with offer. Shim achas b'shveiferes. If you're holding on to the tube, the hipel offer l'mayim, and the offer fell into the water. Kosher. Even though you didn't actually put it in there biyadayim, but it was thrown in there with kavana, that's considered. You have to understand how exactly this is a lakicha. How is that comparable to the case that we mentioned by the taking of the lulav or the hoshana and taking it with a sudar? So we end up saying that is the proof. Ba'omer Rabba, a person has to make sure not to thrust it into the lulav. The dilma natri tarfi. It's possible that the leaves are going to break off. Ahavi chatzitza. We know this. For those that have the hadassim and the ravos in these holders. So if you shove it in, the leaves are going to end up breaking off, and therefore they're no longer really connected to the rava and the hadas, and that could be a chatzitza. Even though it's true, it's detached from the rava or detached from the hadas. That's min b'minai. That's not going to be a chatzitza, and even though it's true that which is mechuber, the actual hadassim which are attached, are being blocked, so to speak, by some of these leaves, that's not an issue. So it says, when it comes to cutting cutting it off, if a person cuts it from the bottom, you can't nick rosha cut from the top. If you cut from the bottom, you have to be careful that when you cut it off, that the leaves will end up again loosening when you cut them. Again, you cut the bottom off because it's a very long lulav, let's say, so you cut the very bottom a few inches. So the truth is, there's going to be some of the parts of the lulav branches that are now detached, but they're still all tied in. Again, even though those lulav leaves are disconnected, it's not a chatzitza because it's min b'minai. The Yomi Rabba hadas shel mitzvah asal harechbo. It's a very interesting din. So when it comes to hadas of a mitzvah, you're not allowed to smell it. It's like huksa, not allowed to, because that actually is the only thing that hadas has the benefit of smell. Esrog shel mitzvah mutal harechbo, and everyone does that. They always smell the esrog. That's allowed. My timer, because hadas lo reichakoi. Hadas is the purposes for its beautiful fragrance. So ki aksi mereicha aksi, when it's set aside like muksa or huksa mitzvasai, it is for its smell. So therefore you can't smell it. Esrog, the primary purpose of esrog is to eat it. Ki aksi mechil aksi. It's for eating, and therefore you could smell it. And therefore, interestingly enough, the other way around. V'yom Rabba hadas b'mechuber. If you have a das which is attached to the ground, motor rechbo, you're allowed to smell it. And of course, this is referring to on Shabbos. However, esrog b'mechuber asal rechbo. You're not allowed to smell an esrog that is attached to the ground. Now, my timer, because the das lo rech koi ishar salila salnigze. The whole benefit of the hadas is to smell it. So if you smell it while it's attached, so what? You're not going to detach it because it's already served its entire purpose. You smelled it and it was enjoyable. However, esrog the lechilakoi, but again, the purpose of the esrog is to eat. So if you're going to end up start smelling the esrog while it's attached, you may have the desire to eat it and you may pluck it off, which of course cannot be done on Shabbos. Famous Gemara. The lulav goes into the right hand and esrog on the left. My time, because of course the lulav has more mitzvahs. We do more mitzvahs with our right dominant hand. Unless you're a lefty, you eat your yad, you do everything with your left hand because that's your dominant hand. But for a righty, the lulav is in the right hand, and because it has also hadas and rava as opposed to the esrog, which is one. Amli Rabbi Yirmiyah l'Rav Zreika. My time l'Mavrachin el al netilos lulav. After all, we're not just taking the lulav, we're taking the other minim too. Because it's higher than all of them. So for the Gemara, so just take the esrog and just lift it up a little bit, so they're all on the same level. Because it's naturally, among all the minim, it is the biggest one. So therefore, yeah, you could actually line them up if you really want to, but that's not something which is done. Rather, a person will make the bracha on the largest thing, which is most recognizable, which is the lulav. Okay, let's see. Let's keep going. The heichen hayim ananeim. So the question is, at what point, where do we shake the lulav and esrog in Hallel? So b'hodel Hashem, tchil v'soif. We say hodel Hashem 2 times. We say at the beginning of, or in the middle of Hallel, and also at the end. V'ana Hashem hoshiana divrei beis Hillel. Whenever we say Ana Hashem hoshiana, which we say twice, we shake the lulav and esrog in all directions. Ve'shami omrim apa Ana Hashem atzlichana We also say it not just by Ana Hashem Hoshiana, but even by Hashem Atzlichana, which of course we know we're noig not the Pasuk Beis Shammai. By Ana Hashem Atzlichana, we do not shake the Lulav and Esrog. Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Shekol Amahoyim Naneim Esulaveim. They were constantly shaking the Lulav. However, Haim, they, Munaneu El Ba'ana Hashem Hoshiana, which clearly means that they paskin like the Shita of Beis Hillel, and they did not shake it at Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. So Nanua Mandakar Shemei. The question is, whoever mentions its name, where do we find, says Rashi, Shei Adam Chayiv L'Naneya, they have to shake it. The Pshita L'Tana, that's so obvious, the Kavi Heichen Hoim Naneyan, which is very similar to the very first question of the Sechtas Brachos. When is the earliest time that we start saying the Shema at night? So over there it says Tana Heicha Koy Dekar Me Masai. Same thing. How do we know over here that there's any requirement of shaking? So Hasan Koy. It's based on another place over there. Kul of Sheish Bo Shosh Tfachim Kidela Nanea Bo Kosher. As we mentioned, that the lulav has to be 4 tfachim, 3 tfachim, and an extra tefach Kidela Nanea Boy. So since it already mentions the idea of shaking there, so therefore it's mentioned here. And therefore now we have the ability to now bring up the question of exactly at what point do we shake. Tanan Hasan. Shtei halechem v'shtei kisya seres ketzad hu oisa. So on Shavuos, in which we take the 2 breads which are made out of wheat, and the shtei kisya seres, on Shavuos, these 2 lambs, so there is also this din of shaking. As Rashi says, you have to shake them and move them around while it's alive. As the pasuk says, "Behenif hakoyin oisam al lechem al shnei kvasim, hakvasim chaim maniach shtei halechem al shtei hakvasim." So the question is, how is that done over there? So maniach shtei halechem, they would take the shtei halechem, the 2 breads, al gabi shnei hakvasim, and they would put it on top of the 2 lambs. Maniach yado tachtem, they would put their hands underneath it. And they would move the kvasim and the shtei lechem in all directions. Shnemar asher hunaf asher hura. Rav Yochanan. Why is it done in all these different directions? A famous Gemara. The reason is, again, this is the source is by the shtei lechem and the shtei kisiyat seres. We bring in all 4 directions to remind that Hashem is in all 4 directions. Up and down to remind us that Hashem is in control and in charge of the heavens and earth. In Eretz Yisrael they had a different explanation. We're saying that Hashem, because we're shaking fruits and vegetables, so we're basically saying that Hashem should protect us from all these bad winds, so that we should be able to have a successful crop. And of course, this is the time of our harvest. From bad dews. From here we learn, as we continue to Lamed Chesed and Aleph, that even shiri mitzvah ma'akvin esapranios, even things which are not the primary part of the mitzvah, but even smaller aspects, can also hold back from punishment. Shahari tenufa shiri mitzvahi. When it comes to the waving, that's considered to be like the shiri mitzvah. Nonetheless, it has the capacity and ability to be able to protect us from bad winds and dews. And there we go. So too, just like the din of shaking in all directions, the shtei lechem and the kisya seres, so too we do the same thing with a lulav. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Matile Maisila, that he would take it back and forth, as Rashi says, Moilechu Mevi. And when he would do it, Maisile Omer, he used to say an interesting expression: Dingira be'ene desitna. Let this be as an arrow in the eye of Satan. So as though he was, again, we see, as I mentioned before, that the lulav and esrog is a way of countering the chet of Adam Harishon. Some say that the esrog was, again, from Adam Harishon, was the actual eighth from the Eitz Hadas was an esrog, There are those, as we saw by the Sinihar Barzel, it's from the sides of Gehenna. So again, over here, we see that there's some allusion to this particular mitzvah, that it's a form of going against the ways of the Satan. The truth is, it's not the proper thing to say to the Satan, because we don't want to instigate him and incite him, because he may end up getting upset at our tone, and we may be more likely to fall subject to being punished. So again, so we're going to stop there. So again, question 7 was, Maha Makar, what was the source? So we said it has to do with the fact that if you threw it, the ashes into the mayim, right? When it comes to the kiddush mechatas, if you were holding onto this tube and the upper fell into the water, that is considered to be velokach. That's like it, because the pasuk is velokach. So therefore, that's the idea, is because of the pasuk is velokach. And therefore, we went out from here that even though you didn't really take it, but it was through another means, that's still acceptable. Question 8. Shiri mitzvah. 2 answers. We see this when it comes to the tenufa of the shtei halechem and also the nanua of the lulav. So these things, even though they're not the primary, the shaking is not the main thing, because you're mekayim the mitzvah of lulav just by once you pick it up, which is the reason why when we make the bracha on the lulav, we do it pitam down, and therefore after the bracha we put it up, because otherwise you're not going to be mivarach or b'lasiyasan. You have to make a bracha before you do the mitzvah. So the pitam has to be down, because technically you've done the mitzvah just by holding it. We shake it, again, for these other reasons, to acknowledge that Hashem is in all places, and Hashem is in control in this world, and Hashem protects us from unfortunate calamities such as ruchos v'taloyim royim. Okay, let's see question TA 17. Ha'im efsher lichrech suder, is a person able to take a kerchief al yadai, in his hands, b'litel halulav, b'litel halulav al yadei kli madua. So, as we said already, this is question 17, b'suder hu plukta ilukicha al yadei davar acher havi ilukicha. So it's actually a machlokas, because it says you're not allowed to do it, and the other opinion says you could. However, kli, in a vessel, koyama lo mahani davi derech bezoyin, as Rashi says, that is something which is definitely not acceptable if it was done in a kli. The question is a suder, which is not derech bezoyin, it's totally if whether you're holding l'kicha yedei davar acher shmo l'kicha. Question TB 18. He'im mutter laharech b'Shabbos min ha'mechuber u'madua. Are you allowed to smell certain things on Shabbos? So it says, if it's not for the purpose of eating, like the hadas, it's mutter. So therefore, that's the reason when it comes to the hadas, if it's mechuber, you can smell it, because you're not going to detach it from the ground. However, when it comes to an esrog, that we are concerned because it's lachilakoi, you may end up eating it, and therefore you may end up detaching it, which of course one cannot do on Shabbos. Ad kan.